Hi, welcome back to the Spirit's Path. This is D, and today's tarot card of the day out of the Wildwood Tarot deck is the Nine of Vessels in Generosity. And when I was thinking about this card today, I reflected and meditated on pretty much the last week. And, a couple days ago, everything was frustrated. It was just like, the thought that came to mind is like, okay, how do I get back to that joyful bliss state that I was in? And as I was thinking about that, I was just like, you just got to be generous. You got to be generous with your time, or generous with your resources, or generous with, with what you're doing. Okay, giving back to the community, giving back to, the universe, giving back to, to loved ones, and just having that gift of giving out to other people. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that, you gotta, be a benefactor at an event or anything like that, but just doing it so, you could, even if it's just at a restaurant, instead of doing 10%, do 15. That's being generous, all right? Above and beyond. And, being generous with your time and just being available for other people. Because when you do that, you open yourself up. And in opening yourself up, to the universe and to, to spirit, you're able to give more freely of what you do have. The other thought that came to mind too was being grateful. Being grateful for, where you're at, being grateful for your position at work, being grateful for, those that are in your life, and just, being out there and, be grateful for what you do have, because there's a lot of people that they don't have much, okay, but they're grateful for what they do have. And when you can put that gratefulness with generosity and put those two together, that raises your energy level, away from that fear and that anger of that Five of Arrows and frustration. So here that card came up 2 days ago. The Knight of Arrows is right behind it. And, it's giving you that, like I said yesterday, more of that loftier view. Take that lofty view, that you had yesterday with that Knight of Arrows, that quick, swift action, right? That vision and power that he has, all right? And give yourself another perspective. Where is it that I could be more generous with what I have? And as a result of that, when you're generous with others and your resources and things like that, you're grateful for what you have as well, right? Because, the way of doing that just opens up your heart. I remember years ago when I was traveling, I stopped at a restaurant early in the morning and, went in there for breakfast before I, started traveling. And, a dude walked in behind me, and the next thing I know, he comes up to me and, he's, he had his Bible open and he's just, hey, sir, would you, be so kind as to, buy me a coffee. And, at the time I was like, at the time that it happened, I was kind of taken aback because I didn't have a generous spirit, but I had a kind spirit. And, it touched me a little bit. He read me a Bible verse. And, I told the waitress, I said, I don't want to just buy him a coffee. Let's buy him some breakfast. Go over there and see what he wants for breakfast. Bought him some breakfast. And then when I finished my breakfast, I sat with him for a little bit and we talked about, God and the universe and spirit. And, it was a blessing on both sides. All right. And I let the waitress know, keep his coffee, pot full. So, not only did I pay my bill and his bill, but I gave her extra to make sure that he was taken care of during the day. Now, as I drove away, I kind of thought about it as, maybe I was being taken advantage of. But I looked at that and said, what, Lord, God, Spirit, thank you for putting him in my life, because obviously I've had the resources to be generous and to help other people out. And, so what if it cost me an extra couple bucks? All right. I knew I was going to get that back tenfold somewhere down the line. Okay. And sure enough, over the years, it's come back, and as it continued to give out, I continue to receive. And that's just in my life, right? And I can use that as, an analogy for you and your spiritual path. And that when you give, and you give of your heart, and you give, not even generously, just, when you do so without even, giving it a second thought, it lifts your spirits up. It makes you feel good. It raises that vibration up from that frustration energy that happened a couple days. And, the green man's down here and he's watching that. He's saying, yes, you've had that challenge and that obstacle that's in your way, but you acted quickly and swiftly by listening to what the hawk had to say. All right? And you respond accordingly. That inner strength showed you that you can, you have the ability to do whatever you want with the Woodward card. And maybe that's just part of the healing that you need to go through right now with that Seven of Stones. Because you've been renewed with that Ace of Vessels and that waters of life. So, with that Knight of Arrows being out there, he's asking you, what do you need to stand up for? Not only do you need to stand up for yourself, you need to stand up for, your fellow man. And that could be, let's take something, from a work situation, right? Maybe there's somebody that's new that's within the office. And, they don't know where to go for lunch. They don't know who to sit with. All the tables are filled with, different cliques and different people and stuff like that. You could be generous with your time to introduce yourself to this new person and say, hey, I'm so-and-so. I saw you in the cube over there. Are you new? And just start a new friendship, right? That's being generous with your time, and say, hey, why don't you come join our group? Or maybe you sit with them for a couple, 2 or 3 days, and then invite them to your group. That makes that person feel more welcome, feel more liked within the workplace, right? Because he is new. They're nervous. They don't know the ins and outs and, who's who and this, that, and the other thing. And, maybe you get on a project with them. You start a great relationship. So, being generous with your time, to help out within the community, to sit down and talk with elderly people, to, meet a new friend at work, right? That's how you can be generous with your time and resources. So those are just a couple of examples, that came up, and you took that stand. What do you need to take a stand for? That's what that hawk asked you. And you know what? It opens yourself up to, to the universe. Spirit sees what's going on. The green man sees what's going on. And as a result, it just, it lifts up your spirit to that next level. And that helps you on your spiritual path. Because now you can look back and say, I remember that challenge. I remember that obstacle. And this is how I did it. All right? I met that new person. I helped out somebody, in a restaurant. I gave a little bit extra on a tip. Small things, but big implications on your spiritual journey. So that's today's card of the day, the Nine of Vessels and Generosity. Hit that like button for me, subscribe to the channel, share it with others, and give me a thumbs up. And this is D for the Spirit's Path. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Take care, God bless, and stay safe, everybody.